Okay, everybody, welcome back. This review video is dealing with the eukaryotes. So eukaryotes, basically, that's referring to true. Eu means true. Karyo means nucleus. So anything that has the true nucleus. They also have other organelles or other structures that exist in the cell that are membrane bound that, have functions in the cell. And we're going to go over all of that in this chapter. Be sure to remember that this isn't going to cover everything in chapter 5. Watch the full video, read your chapter, do your homework. And this is meant to just to help you get, understanding of the major concepts. So, talking about the eukaryotes. So yeah, there are microorganisms that, technically fall under eukaryotes umbrella. So this would include things like the protists and yes, algae, and there's very little algae that causes diseases that we might be concerned about, but some of them do cause like a red tide or something like that. That can cause neurotoxins to form that can be deadly. So that is something that can affect cause disease in humans. Then we have the protozoa. Algae and protozoa both are part of the protista kingdom, but they're not at all like one another. So there's some obvious ones that are protists that would be involved in disease-causing ones. Things like malaria. Malaria is a protist. Toxoplasmosis, that's protista, it's protozoan. Amoeba, the brain-eating amoebas. There's a bunch of other ones. I don't want to get into all of them because we will talk about them later on when we get into the diseases. But don't worry, they're not like, I know we talk a lot about bacteria, but there's definitely microbes involved in eukarya as well that are worth talking about. The fungi, of course, we know there's fungal infections out there, whether it's fungal meningitis or you get fungal infection in your sinuses, or which I did, I've had, or, athlete's foot or ringworm, all sorts of things that can be caused by fungi, tend to be a little bit more slow growing, but are pathogens nonetheless. And then we have the helminths. The helminths are the worms. So that's going to be the roundworms and the flatworms, the flukes, all of those. So yeah, those are the more developing country type diseases. But we'll get into those later. But starting with the cells, organelles, right? So those are membrane bound structures in the cells that have, some sort of function associated with them. Prokaryotes don't have any membrane bound organelles at all. So this is, unique only to the eukaryotes. Both of them do have ribosomes, but ribosomes are made of protein and RNA, a little bit of protein, but mostly RNA. Which we'll talk more about whenever we get into the genetics chapter later on. But yeah, they're more important for translation and forming proteins and stuff. So, okay, so mitochondria. Mitochondria is an organelle that is considered the energy powerhouse. This is where aerobic respiration is going to occur. We will talk about that's one of my favorite chapters to talk about in the whole wide world is aerobic respiration. If you haven't learned about this in physiology yet, I think it is absolutely, fascinating and fantastic and one of the most beautiful things you can ever understand about biology. And I can't wait to talk about that one with you. But yeah, that's mitochondria. That's where this occurs in eukaryotic cells, in your cells. Bacteria have this happen in their cytoplasm and on the inside of their membrane. That's it. Okay. We say energy powerhouse. They're generating energy in the form of ATP. We'll get into that more, don't worry, but it is just a molecule that our cells use to store energy, and we harness the that energy within ATP. It's adenosine triphosphate. And remember how I told you guys about how phosphates have all those oxygens that are negatively charged on them, they push when you have a whole bunch of phosphates together. So a P surrounded by a bunch of oxygens, a P surrounded by a bunch of oxygens, a P surrounded by a bunch of oxygens, all next to each other, and they're all negative. Guess what they do? They push each other apart. So we have these covalent bonds holding it all together that are storing all that energy from them wanting to push apart. When we break that bond, it releases a ton of energy that we can use to power things in the cell. And that's how ATP works. So ATP stores energy. ADP is the product that's made when we clip off one of those phosphates and release that energy. So that's how that's going to work. You just got a little brief rundown of that. I'm sure you are thankful. Okay, so the endoplasmic reticulum. This is an organelle where translation will be common. Ribosomes, again, like I said just a minute ago, are structures that are going to read the copies. Oh, it's so hard to explain what this is whenever I haven't gone over it yet. Basically, this is where proteins can be made by ribosomes. We'll get into the details some other time. And then we also package and process and, deal with all of the proteins that are being made and modified and all that. Then we also have the chloroplasts. That's where photosynthesis will occur. If, that organism has photosynthesis, it works similarly to how the mitochondria work. But they utilize sunlight to activate pigments that are in the chloroplast. And then when sunlight energy activates those pigments, then they're able to generate basically ATP energy from that process, and then use that little bit of energy from that in order to allow them to take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then fix it into sugars that they can then use in aerobic respiration like we do, which is pretty friggin' cool. I think it's cool. So, but yeah, so pretty cool stuff there. That's what happens in the chloroplasts. The nucleus, the membrane bound organelle, where we're keeping our genetic information in the form of chromosomes. In the case of eukaryotes, prokaryotes, bacteria have one circular chromosome, and that's it. We have, many linear chromosomes. So let's see. Transcription, so making RNA out of DNA. So think of DNA as the blueprint, and RNA is the working copy that we're making and taking out with us. That's transcription, DNA to RNA, and that happens in the nucleus. It has to happen within the nucleus, and then we'll move the RNA out into the cytoplasm to be translated. So we'll use that copy to make a protein, read it out to make a protein that corresponds with it. So that's translation. So that's the rundown for that. We mentioned a little bit about the fungi and the protists and the helminths. So fungi, they do have cell walls, okay, but they are not made of peptidoglycan, and they're not made of cellulose. Plants have cellulose cell walls. Fungi, their cell walls are made of chitin. They do not have chloroplasts either. Fungi do not perform photosynthesis. The algae do, not the fungi. Fungi, remember, these also are going to include yeasts. So yeasts are fungi, by the way, because you forget. These are pretty helpful in the food industry, bread and cheese and beer and wine and all of these things that we have to thank for fungi. There are some pathogens, most of them are opportunistic. Some examples would be Cryptococcus neoformans and Coccidioides immitis. Both of those are going to cause fungal meningitis, and usually in immunocompromised individuals. And then, ringworm, athlete's foot, there are all sorts of diseases that can be caused by fungi. We think about yeast. If we think about yeast infections, then we would be thinking about opportunistic infections that are going to be occurring. Like if you take an antibiotic and kill off your bacteria in your system, then normal yeast, which are normal and fine to be in your body, will overgrow because they're now, I call it the stadium seat effect. So the normal good bacteria and flora in your body that has been balanced and is healthy is taking up the stadium seats that they're supposed to in the stadium, so that bad guys can't sit down. Well, if you kill off all of those good guys, bad guys can now sit down, or people that were good, the ones that were the organisms that were fine and good, maybe serving some sort of benefit in their seats where they were supposed to be, can now take over the whole place, and that can cause problems. That's what happens with yeast infections, and that's what happens with C. diff as well. So yeah, opportunistic. Moving on to protista. Protista, the protists are going to include algae. So these are the largest oxygen producers on the planet. So most of the world's oxygen is being produced through photosynthesis by algae, microorganisms. Okay. Protozoa as well. So we've talked a little bit about the protozoa, the malaria and all that. So the protozoa can have two forms. Not all of them have two forms, but they can have two forms. Trophozoite is the free living vegetative form. So it's like the vegetative cells for bacteria. And then the cysts, and these are the hardy ones that are protected from harsh conditions that are, analogous to endospores in bacteria. But this is for protozoa, so they have their own term. Do not confuse them, but do be able to identify that they are similar to one another. Bacteria, vegetative cells, and then protozoa, that's the trophozoite. Bacteria, endospores, protozoa, that's the cyst. All right, helminths, these are the worms. A lot of these guys are multicellular. So we have the platyhelminthes, these are the flatworms. I think platy sounds like flat, so, you know, flatworms. Cestodes, these are the tapeworms, and the trematodes are the flukes. Those are both, cestodes are platyhelminthes, trematodes are platyhelminthes. Both of these are flatworms. And then we have the nematodes. The nematodes are our roundworms. I think that's it for this chapter. So we'll come back to the viruses in the next chapter, and we'll have fun with that. I don't know. I'm having a good time.